Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar that we're hosting this morning here at the Urban Developer. My name is Adam DeMarco. I'm the founder and chief executive, and I'll be your host for this discussion. Today, we're focused on the Gold Coast, and we're taking a look inside the mind of the leading residential developers and experts. Matthew, thank you very much. You are one of the key people on the ground there from a planning point of view, beyond planning as well. You'll be taking us through your presentation, so I'll let you get straight into it and start with your share screen.
Great, thanks, Adam, and good morning, everybody. Thanks to the Urban Developer for having us along today. What a group of people. And great to be able to speak to, I suppose, the good fun that we've been having down here on the Gold Coast over the last couple of months in particular. So, yeah, as you said, Adam, I'll take the group first of all just through some of the kind of big picture observations and reflections that we at Urbis here have over the last 12 months or so, and we'll venture a couple of thoughts about where we see things heading over the next 6 months or so. So I'll just skip through. So first of all, look, kind of at the kind of the most macro scale, I suppose, I think it's worth observing really just how strongly Southeast Queensland is performing relative to other states around the country. And of course, we all know that we're kind of living in an environment of high liquidity. We've got low interest rates. We've got relative stability on the COVID front. And I think globally, and you'll hear some of the panel speak to this a little bit later on, we've got quite a rare alignment of where the global economies and markets are at. And all of that's creating quite a heady mix and one which we're spending a bit of time to try and unpack. We think really that Queensland is actually pretty well placed relative to a number of the other states in Australia, and that, as a first observation, is one of the fundamental drivers for some of the strengths we've seen more recently. If we come down to the Gold Coast, just to remind us of really kind of what the task ahead is, the kind of planning for a long time now in this city has been really for the Gold Coast to be a city of about 1 million people by 2041. And in order to meet that task, we've been needing to plan for around about 15,000 people per annum in terms of growth and just over 6,000 dwellings per annum. What's interesting to just stop and reflect about that is that over the last 10 to 15 years, which on the Gold Coast on the whole has been relatively solid performing period, we've only been delivering about 3,800 dwellings per annum. So if people are anxious about the level of activity and development and growth on the Gold Coast that's existed over the last couple of years, the news is that we actually have to find a way to grow smarter and do a better pace of actually delivering product on the ground if we're to meet those long-standing population targets. If we kind of course, there's a much broader story about jobs and economic development, which we won't venture into today. But if we start to drill down to really kind of what that population growth is looking like and feeling like on the ground in terms of supply and demand factors, the supply side of the equation is very tight. We'll focus on apartments today, but we can't let this conversation start without observing that really on the land development side of things, really now we're kind of as an industry putting the supply of greenfield land at less than 4 years. And for anyone who's got experience in trying to deliver greenfield product and the many years, if not decades, it takes to deliver some of these projects, a 3 to 4 year supply side equation is a pretty frightening prospect. That, of course, is part of the reason why the policy settings on the Gold Coast now for a long time have been that we will try to accommodate about 80% of that population growth task in apartments, primarily along the coastal strip and on some key east-west links. And that is where some of the other key supply side constraints that we see bearing out are really working hard. We know that the kind of coastal strip of the Gold Coast is one of the most fragmented urban areas in the country. Land amalgamation, land acquisition, the predominance of strata title are all factors that weigh against easy site amalgamation. And those challenges exist in precisely the kind of areas where we need to deliver this product. So we've got supply side constraints in general terms, actually quite tight across both land and the apartment market. And we're seeing that now bear out in very low residential vacancy rates as well as a number of other key indicators. On the demand side of the equation, Of course, we've seen international migration slow down, but and we're still kind of, I think it's fair to say, waiting to see where the impacts of the JobKeeper wind back and other economic forces land us. But we undoubtedly do have elevated levels of demand, driven principally by interstate migration. Victorians are everywhere at the moment. It's great to see, as are many Sydney-siders, together with a fair amount of intrastate migration as well, and that's starting to bear out in the ABS figures. And of course, the other observation I think we need to make, we might hear a little bit about later in the panel, is just how much of an effect consumer sentiment and that fear of missing out is actually having in the marketplace at the moment. There's some changes in buyer profile, which David's going to take us through, so I won't spend too much time on that. But one observation I did want to make about kind of the market on the whole is that really what we are seeing now is a continued trend in the decreasing scale of projects on the Gold Coast as a whole. Back in 2019, relatively recently still, really the average apartment project was around about 100 units, and we're seeing that steadily decrease now to kind of 60 or 70 units. We think that's a good thing on the whole for the economy of the Gold Coast and its robustness, but it certainly is a factor at play in where things are at. And again, I won't spend too much time on this, but more recently, we're starting to see emerge some headwinds in terms of increasing construction cost and also capacity constraints across labour and supply lines, which the guys will come to later. A very quick observation just in terms of the residential apartment market. We, of course, release this every quarter. We sample about 70% of the Gold Coast apartment market. First quarter of this year, absolutely off the chart. We had to change the scale on the bar graph to capture just how many of sales were recorded in the first quarter. Evidence of that strong demand side. We think apartment supply is coming back on the whole, but of course it's important to understand the granularity of that equation. And there's some observations which we'll speak to perhaps later in question time about which parts of the Gold Coast, which market segments are better supplied than others as we move forward. And really that kind of puts us in an outlook where we think there's some kind of relative strength in some fundamentals, but of course we do need to be careful and there's still a lot of uncertainty. So really an outlook of cautious optimism. What's starting to underpin some of that, I suppose, in a longer term sense, though, is the significant level of investment that we're seeing in some really key city building infrastructure. And the list you can see on the screen are really the big ticket items that we need to touch on today. So Gold Coast Light Rail. This city is all in on Gold Coast Light Rail. It is where the urban regeneration spine is. It's where 70 or 80% of the growth is intended to be. Light Rail Stage 3, which is the bit from Broadbeach to Burleigh, has been a bit slow getting out of the blocks for a bunch of the reasons, but we'll see construction start in earnest in October, which will be great because the market's been running ahead of that project for a number of years now. Stage 4 is a really important piece to roll straight into. That's the bit which gets us from Burleigh Heads down to the Gold Coast Airport. And we're starting to see pre-feasibilities and business case work done around that. But I think some bumpy times ahead in terms of funding discussions and election cycles. The Coomera Connector, the second M1, is a critical piece of infrastructure to get some additional road capacity through to Brisbane and across the southeast Queensland region. That's progressing significantly and now moving quite rapidly towards early works, as is the Cross River Rail station augmentations, which deal with three new stations down here to move people around the region. The Home of the Arts is a very significant piece of cultural infrastructure, which is the second stage is now come online. It's really starting to change the paradigm and the narrative, particularly the central part of the city. And we're starting to see some sewer capacity upgrades, which were desperately needed through the coastal strip. And I haven't touched on this more broadly, but of course, this conversation now is held against the background of what's actually quite likely of an announcement that the Southeast Queensland region will be invited to host the Olympic Games in 2032. And that's bringing forward some early work around Gold Coast, Brisbane, fast rail, some other really kind of big infrastructure projects that ordinarily we'd be a little bit sceptical about, which is good to see. Right, let's come then finally to what the planning policy environment's doing. And I'll deal in this session with kind of the minutiae of the planning scheme, and we can come in questions to some of the broader political observations and the kind of environment of doing business. But there are two significant things I think everybody on this call needs to understand in terms of changes for the planning policy framework over the next 6 to 12 months. The first of that is a major amendment pack to our Gold Coast City Plan here, which has been in the works now for a number of years and is still bubbling along. It has potentially very significant implications for anyone in the residential apartment market. What you can see on the screen there is an illustration of just one of the metrics which will be changed and will fundamentally affect the delivery of apartment product. That's on site cover. So typically for most of the projects people on this call will be doing that we're doing with you at the moment, most projects in our urban corridors start at a site cover around about 50%, get up to about 55% most of the time. The major amendment packs intend to reduce that to 40% for kind of mid-scale buildings and to 30% for high-rise projects. Very significant impacts on yield, and of course that's not just a 10 or 20% impact on yield, that's a project no-go kind of territory. It's compounded by some changes which are proposed to setbacks again, which are really geared actually at residential apartment projects. And again, you can see on the slide there, but as matters are today, typically most kind of 10 to 20 story apartment projects will be looking at side setbacks of around about 3.5 to 4 metres. Now, that's been really important given the land subdivision pattern on the Gold Coast and the fact that many projects are actually trying to stay away from delivering one per floor luxury apartments and look at getting yield across two apartments per floor. These setbacks were going to increase to between 8 and 10 metres. Now, remembering that most of our urban regeneration corridor is on allotments with a 20 to 30 metre frontage, we're in real risk if these amendments come in as they're currently proposed of just building lift cores and not having the opportunity to actually deliver product, or being forced to deliver high-end market product, which will underpin some of the concerns that we're seeing, and the guys will speak to more broadly. The final observation I'd make about where the planning framework goes is really important. So the council this week have released the information which really deals with how we will see development uplift happen on the light rail stage 3 corridor, so between Broadbeach and Burleigh Hedge. You can see the corridor on the map there. And the basic idea is that there will be a reintroduction for the first time in over 5 years of neighbourhood scale planning or precinct scale planning on the Gold Coast. We have had very broad scale zones, which has created opportunity but also some challenges. So there is a move on to really take a deep dive into more intensive planning around light rail stations in stage 3, and that is intended to provide the opportunity for broad scale engagement, which presents some risks, but I suppose on the opportunity side, I do think will actually, in the fullness of time, create an environment of greater investment confidence and certainty for people on the call. So a step change in the way that we're going to go about planning on the Gold Coast, that's starting to kick off. You'll see that start to run out over the next 3 years. And in the meantime, we'll be building that piece of city building infrastructure, and projects will be going along in the meantime. So a very fast pace of activity on the Gold Coast. Keeping up with it is half the challenge, and that's why sessions like today are so valuable. So that's my overview, and I might hand over to Adam to bring David in and tell us about the market.
Thanks very much, Matthew. I'll get you to jump out of your share screen. Just as you do that, a couple of questions. I mean, Gold Coast has sort of reputationally been open for business, and all of a sudden you've got what is potentially some pretty substantial changes to building footprints and therefore the ultimate viability of sites. What's driving that politically?
That's a community sense in some parts of the city about the fear of overdevelopment, and I think frankly it's probably also coming back to the fact that we have these very broad scale citywide zones, but we're a city of kind of villages and neighbourhoods, and I think it's actually part of the nuance and the granularity of those neighbourhoods which is really intrinsic to the Gold Coast, which we lost when we got the broad scale paintbrush out on zones, and then what that's created is actually kind of an environment where people are concerned that their patch of the city is going to be lost or turned into another one. That's kind of manifested itself now through some political risk, and so we've seen kind of a turnaround to say, well, look, how do we make sure we kind of keep these kind of string of pearls different and make sure these neighbourhoods are well set up, and I think on the whole that's a good thing. It's just a bit of a bumpy ride to navigate.
Yeah, and just for those that are interested, what areas of the Gold Coast are probably more susceptible to kind of the change or more exposed to the change versus others?
Yeah, and that's where the light rail corridor comes in. So the light rail corridor comes in with a mandate for transformational change, including scale of development, much more urban. So the hitting zones for this are Mermaid, Nobby's Beach, Burleigh Heads, Palm Beach, and down now to Kirra and Coolangatta. So a lot of the parts of the city where everyone on the panel today is doing a lot of projects, not so intensely felt in the northern part of the city, but anywhere where that transformational change on the back of big infrastructure is coming in is where the hotspots are.
Okay, and just in terms of DA activity, obviously lots of DAs being lodged, and council obviously only has so many resources. What's that doing for timeframes, and what's the capacity for council to sort of process applications?
Yeah, look, DA applications up significantly. To their credit, the council are doing a pretty good job of keeping up with the pace of churn. Probably where we're seeing the challenges, though, is actually in the back end of DA processes, where we're really kind of finding quite polarised discussions, and it's kind of coming as the market tries to respond to delivering the right product. And you think about that kind of, those finely balanced feasibilities where 150 mils on a side setback is a really important argument. The question of whether all the car parking's underground or above ground is material. They're the kind of discussions which are not kind of so planning related, but are the kind of root cause for why there's a polarised debate in the back end of some of these DAs. And that's probably where there's an opportunity for kind of the council and industry to come together a little bit more, a bit of a deeper understanding and shared knowledge about what those issues are and just how materially they can affect the delivery of housing in the city. Will kind of get us singing again.
Awesome. Matthew, thank you very much for your insights. If anyone needs any planning or strategic advice, Matthew's there at Urbis. Be more than happy to help you. Thanks for your time.